They were small, fragile, primitive. When we first discovered their world, we dismissed them as insignificant. A species still bound to its home world, still struggling with internal wars, still unaware of the greater galaxy that surrounded them. To the Empire, they were nothing. But we made a mistake. We believed their weaknesses made them harmless. We assumed their wars would consume them. We assumed their emotions would make them unstable. We assumed their fragile bodies meant they could be crushed with ease. We assumed wrong, because humans do not die the way other species do. They do not surrender. They do not kneel. They do not accept their fate. And when we tried to erase them, we learned the most terrifying truth of all. They were never weak. They were just waiting for something to fight for. And now, we are the ones who are doomed. The Galactic Empire had spent centuries expanding, absorbing or eliminating any species that might one day pose a threat to its absolute rule. Its reach extended across thousands of star systems, its fleets unmatched, its power unquestioned. For generations, it had maintained control through one simple principle: anticipate and neutralize potential threats before they could arise. That was why, when a new world was discovered on the fringes of explored space, the Empire's intelligence division was assigned to assess it. The planet, called Earth by its inhabitants, was nothing remarkable at first glance, a standard terrestrial world orbiting a mid-sized star. The species that dominated it, humans, were physically unimpressive, technologically primitive, and socially fractured. Reports indicated that they were aggressive, but disorganized, constantly warring among themselves, incapable of unifying under a single rule. Their world had endured centuries of conflict, famine, disease, and natural disasters, yet they had not collapsed. The initial conclusion was simple: humanity was weak. The Empire's intelligence officers compiled a full report summarizing humanity's status. Their technology was centuries behind galactic standards. Their biology was fragile, their lifespan short, their emotional instability an obvious flaw. Most importantly, they lacked true unity. Unlike the Empire, which functioned under one supreme rule, humans had divided themselves into separate nations, each with their own agendas. They spent more time fighting each other than preparing for the future. A strategy was devised. There was no immediate urgency to act. Humanity would be observed, studied, and when the time was right, quietly eliminated before they could ever leave their system. It was standard protocol for civilizations deemed too unpredictable to be allowed expansion. But there was one anomaly, a minor detail buried in the intelligence reports: anomalies in human adaptability. Certain patterns didn't make sense. Wars that should have wiped them out had only pushed them forward. Natural disasters that should have set them back had instead driven innovation. Plagues that should have culled their numbers had led to medical breakthroughs that made them stronger. The analysts noted it. The strategists ignored it. Because, in the end, they were just humans. And humans, the Empire believed, were insignificant. It was a miscalculation they would not live to correct. The fleet arrived in Earth's orbit without warning. 1,000 warships, silent and waiting, positioned themselves above the planet, their weapons primed. From the command deck of the lead vessel, the alien fleet commander observed the world below with cold detachment. This was not a battle. It was an execution. The first strike was immediate and absolute. Orbital bombardments turned cities into firestorms. Entire regions were erased within moments. Energy beams and kinetic strikes shattered the surface, sending shockwaves across continents. The oceans boiled, the sky darkened, and humanity screamed. By all calculations, it should have ended there. The species was fragile, their infrastructure weak, their military incapable of resisting an empire that had conquered worlds far more advanced than theirs. But then, the reports came in. Ground forces were met with something unexpected: resistance. At first, it was dismissed as desperation. Scattered survivors, wielding crude weapons, launching hopeless attacks. But the humans did not fight as expected. They did not flee. They did not surrender. They did not break. The first wave of alien infantry units moved in to confirm the final extermination, clearing ruins, executing any remaining life signs. That was when the anomalies began. Squads disappeared in areas that had already been cleared. Entire platoons lost contact in the ruins of once great cities. Alien soldiers reported seeing humans, only for them to vanish into the rubble, waiting, watching. The commander read one report with growing unease. They were injured, bleeding, broken, but they kept fighting. We shot one down, but he got up again. I saw him smile before he charged. Before he laughed, the report had been cut short. The soldier had not been heard from again. More reports followed. Humans who should have collapsed from their wounds continued to fight. Small resistance cells, using guerrilla tactics with terrifying efficiency, were tearing through squads with knowledge of the terrain that made them ghosts in the ruins. The commander, confused, ordered a second wave of reinforcements. More troops landed. The alien soldiers, armed with superior technology and numbers, pushed deeper into the shattered cities. And yet, they continued to lose. The resistance was not an army. It was something else. They were too fast, too unpredictable, too unbreakable. The commander saw footage of a human surrounded, cornered, dying. He should have surrendered. Instead, he laughed. Then he pulled the pin on a grenade and took 3 alien soldiers with him. For the first time in the history of the Empire, an invasion force meant to erase a species from existence was experiencing something unthinkable. They were afraid. This was not a war. It was the beginning of something far worse. The invasion had been swift, brutal, and, by all calculations, successful. Earth's cities were in ruins, its infrastructure reduced to smoldering wreckage, and its population nearly exterminated. Nearly. The fleet commander, still overseeing the planetary purge from orbit, had assumed any remaining human activity was a final flicker of resistance, a desperate refusal to accept the inevitable. But as the days passed, something felt wrong. The resistance was not dwindling. It was growing. The Alien Intelligence Division scrambled to assess the situation, reviewing battlefield footage and analyzing intercepted human communications. The reports defied logic. Survivors have been spotted coordinating in the ruins. They are adapting, changing tactics every time we engage. We cut off their supply lines, but they continue to fight. Where are they getting weapons? No answer made sense. The humans should have been crushed. Their armies were gone, their governments destroyed, their world on fire. Yet they were still fighting. Then came the truly impossible reports. Scouts reported seeing humans who should be dead still moving. Snipers shot them, and they kept advancing. Some were found performing crude medical procedures on themselves, resetting broken bones, cauterizing their own wounds, pushing their bodies beyond normal biological thresholds. And yet they were not monsters. They were not some enhanced species with superior genetics. They were just humans. And that was what terrified the Empire the most. Every species the Empire had fought before had limits. They had thresholds of pain, exhaustion, and fear. But humans? They ignored those limits. The Intelligence Division intercepted one final distress call from a doomed squad pinned inside a ruined city. The voice of the alien soldier was filled with something unfamiliar, terror. They should be dead. We shot them. We burned them. They keep coming. Silence followed. The transmission ended. The squad was never heard from again. At that moment, the Empire began to realize this was not the aftermath of a war. This was the beginning of something else. Something worse. The Galactic Empire had long understood war. It had crushed rebellions, annihilated entire civilizations, and imposed order upon a chaotic galaxy. It had never feared an enemy before. But humanity was different. What was meant to be a swift extermination had turned into an unexplainable nightmare. The humans were not just surviving. They were adapting. The Intelligence Division, desperate for answers, ordered biological studies on captured human specimens. The lead scientist, an expert in xenobiology, had expected to study a weak, failing species. Instead, he was confronted with something that should not be possible. The prisoner should not be conscious. He was shot 3 times, yet he remains alert. His body shows evidence of multiple injuries, but the healing process has accelerated. He should be in shock. He should be begging for his life. He is doing neither. The human sat in restraints, battered but upright, staring at his captors with something beyond defiance. Not anger, not hatred, anticipation. The scientists' unease deepened. Human bodies were fragile, yes. Their bones broke easily, their skin tore under pressure, their biological systems were no match for the Empire's enhanced physiology. But something was wrong. This species did not simply endure suffering. It thrived in it. The alien scientist ran a final analysis. The conclusion made his blood run cold. They're learning. Their biology is adapting to trauma at an accelerated rate. They're not just resisting, they're evolving in response to our attacks. The scientist stepped back from the specimen, suddenly overcome by an unfamiliar sensation, dread. He turned to his superior. "We need to stop this now." The officer shook his head. "We already tried." In a holding cell, the human gave them a slow, knowing smile. The scientist realized the terrifying truth. This was no longer a war of conquest. It was a war of survival, and the Empire was on the wrong side of it. The Galactic Empire had believed itself invincible. It had expanded across the stars, crushing entire civilizations before they could become threats. Every war it had ever fought ended in victory before it truly began. Until now, the High Command, still refusing to believe that humanity was anything more than a lingering annoyance, dispatched a reinforcement fleet to Earth. This time they would finish the job, but something was different. The resistance was no longer scattered. It was organized, coordinated, precise. The humans were no longer fighting in desperation. They were fighting to win. The alien reinforcements landed with overwhelming force. Tanks, war machines, heavily armed squads meant to stamp out the last remnants of resistance. They never made it past the ruins. The humans had turned their own cities into death traps. Alien patrols were led into carefully planned ambushes. Outposts were attacked with precision strikes. And every alien who stepped into human territory never returned. The fleet commander overseeing the invasion received the first real battle report. "We lost contact with the northern units. The Eastern Battalion was wiped out last night. They're using our own weapons against us." That last report sent a ripple of unease through the command center. How? Humanity should not have had access to the Empire's technology. Yet their forces were using plasma rifles, hijacking alien tanks, and even flying captured enemy ships. The commander watched, horrified, as live footage showed human soldiers moving with eerie efficiency, adjusting their tactics in real time, outmaneuvering squads that had been trained for planetary conquest. They were fighting better, faster, smarter. The realization hit like a cold wave. This was not the same enemy they had first encountered. The humans had learned from every attack, every mistake, every battle. They were becoming something else. And for the first time, the Empire lost a war zone. The fleet retreated from Earth, not because they were ordered to, because they had no choice. The unthinkable had happened. The Empire, the most powerful force in the galaxy, had suffered its first defeat, and humanity had only just begun. The fleet had retreated. An empire that had never known defeat had fled from a species they once considered primitive. What should have been an effortless extermination had turned into something far worse, a growing nightmare. Back in the heart of the Empire, the High Council convened an emergency session. There was no celebration of conquest, no cold analysis of an enemy's final moments. There was only silence. Then the first words were spoken. "We destroyed their world. We erased their cities, burned their people. They should be extinct." And yet, they weren't. The reports from the battlefield painted a picture that defied reason. Humanity was no longer just resisting. They were hunting. Their weapons were no longer crude. They had stolen alien technology, improved it, made it deadlier. They were moving in coordinated strikes, hitting supply routes, sabotaging fleets. The Council studied every invasion log, searching for answers. And then they found it. A single phrase repeated across intercepted transmissions, battlefield reports, and final distress calls from soldiers who never made it home. They are adapting faster than we could stop them. The Empire had never faced an enemy like this. Every species they had conquered had limits. Biological, psychological, strategic. But humans had no limits. They learned from every mistake. They improved after every loss. They turned pain into power. The Council finally understood the mistake they had made. They had believed they were exterminating a species that was too weak to fight back. Instead, they had forged something new, something they could no longer control. This war was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. And the terrifying truth was sinking in. The Empire was not hunting humans anymore. The humans were hunting them. The Empire's reign had lasted millennia. It had crushed worlds, wiped out civilizations, and rewritten history to erase those who had dared to resist. It had always been the predator. Until now, the moment humanity had been declared extinct, its true war had begun. The Council had underestimated them. They all had. Now, the war reports were undeniable. Border worlds had gone silent. Entire fleets had vanished without a trace. Supply lines were severed, trade hubs destroyed. Humanity was not expanding. They were dismantling the Empire piece by piece, system by system. They were no longer just a remnant, no longer just survivors. They were an unstoppable force. The Empire's homeworld sat in darkness. Above it, the human fleet loomed. Warships crafted from salvaged alien technology, improved beyond recognition. The Council, once the rulers of the galaxy, watched from their chambers as the final message arrived. A simple transmission. You feared what we would become. You should have. The orbital defenses fell first. The planetary shields collapsed next. Then, as fire rained from the sky, the Empire ended. No peace talks. No negotiations. No surrender. This was not war. This was justice. Humanity had been marked for extinction. Instead, they had erased their would-be exterminators. And as their fleet moved beyond the ruins of the Empire's capital, one final truth remained. The humans had not fought to rule. They had fought to end the cycle. And they had won. The Empire is gone. A species that had ruled for millennia, that had destroyed entire civilizations, that had believed itself to be invincible, now reduced to ash. And humanity? They do not gloat. They do not celebrate. Because to them, this was never about revenge. This was about survival. But the galaxy watches in horrified silence. Because humanity has won a war it should have lost. They were called weak. They were meant to be forgotten. And yet, they stand among the stars, stronger than ever. The message spreads across the cosmos. Humanity is not a species to be feared. Humanity is a species to be obeyed. And in the wake of the Empire's fall, the only question left is, who's next?